The wind cut through the skeletal trees like the edge of a blade, whispering secrets that the living were never meant to hear. In the winter of 1798, a girl of 12, Mercy Harrow, vanished from the rugged wilderness of Kentucky. Not quietly, not accidentally, but into something far darker than any pioneer could imagine. Her clothing, blood-stained, lay abandoned near a frozen creek, and in her trembling hands she had left a diary, a record of horrors so unspeakable. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed the truth. Within those pages, Mercy confessed things the world would prefer forgotten: betrayals cloaked in love, violence dressed as guidance, and a systematic cruelty that preyed on innocence with the precision of a surgeon. The settlers called it the frontier, a place of opportunity and promise. But under the veil of snow and the serene whispers of the Cumberland Gap, there was a predator. A man with charm, wit, and a knowledge that far exceeded the ordinary: Daniel Crenshaw. At 19, he appeared as the answer to every struggling family's prayer: tall, strong, well-educated, offering security through treacherous wilderness paths. But he carried a darker curriculum, an expertise in death disguised as guidance, in control hidden behind the illusion of protection. He selected his victims not at random, but with careful calculation, studying every detail of their wealth, habits, and vulnerabilities. And Mercy, bright, educated, and unsuspecting, became both instrument and witness. She was not just a child bride, she was a key in a system designed to manipulate, deceive, and destroy. Every letter she would write, every detail she meticulously recorded, unknowingly fed a machine of calculated murder. The wilderness that promised freedom for those daring enough to cross it was instead a stage for crimes so cold, so precise, that history itself would struggle to comprehend them. Families disappeared without a trace. Wealth vanished into unseen hands. And Mercy, she would bear the child of a man who saw innocence as a tool and love as a weapon. Before we descend further, before the story drags you into the depths of human darkness, I want you to anchor yourself. Hit subscribe now, and in the comments write, "I see the unseen," twice. Yes, 2 times. Let it mark your awareness, your willingness to follow this trail of forbidden truths. Every shadow has meaning here, every silence hides a scream, and every truth you uncover will change you. Mercy's story doesn't begin with death, it begins with seduction. A wilderness so vast it swallows families, a man so calculating he turns love into a trap, and a girl too young to know that the world she trusted would betray her in ways that would echo through centuries. The moment we start pulling at these threads, the full tapestry of horror begins to unravel. Mercy Harrow was only 11 when fate abandoned her. Fever took her parents on the road from Virginia, and she found herself orphaned, clinging to the reluctant mercy of distant kin. By autumn of 1797, she walked behind the Caldwell family, ragged, shivering, her mother's diary pressed against her chest like a sacred talisman. For the Caldwells, she was an obligation. For Mercy, they were the last fragile tether to survival, but the wilderness does not honor pity. It devours the weak, the misplaced, the forgotten, and that is when he appeared. Daniel Crenshaw, 19 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of voice that could calm anxious parents and ignite something dangerous in a child's heart. He arrived like an angel of the trail, polished speech, clean clothes, a perfect guide offering safe passage through one of the deadliest corridors in America. The Caldwells saw salvation. Mercy saw something more, because Daniel saw her, not as a burden, not as baggage, but as someone different. When his eyes met hers across the firelight, Mercy felt a heat she could not name. She was too young to understand desire, but not too young to feel the gravity of being chosen. He spoke to her apart from the others, whispered of her intelligence, her rare ability to read, her uniqueness in a world that treated girls as livestock. "You're not like them," he told her. "You're meant for more." And in that moment, the orphan child began to believe she had a destiny. But beneath Daniel's tenderness was calculation. Mercy was not simply a girl. She was a tool, an accomplice he could mold. With her education, she could keep records, track movements, even mask his deeds beneath neat lines of ink. A perfect mask, the bright child bride at his side, making him appear respectable, trustworthy, safe. In a lawless land where families vanished without explanation, who would suspect a man with a wife and unborn child? The wedding came fast, almost hurried, with a traveling preacher summoned under the Caldwell's blessing. The girl who had been orphaned became a wife before her 12th birthday. 3 days later, she no longer belonged to herself. She belonged to Daniel, and through him, to something far more sinister. She thought she was stepping into love. She was stepping into a snare, and once caught, the only way forward would lead her deeper into shadows she could not escape. The first weeks of Mercy's marriage unfolded like a fever dream. Sweet, intoxicating, and disorienting, Daniel built her a cabin hidden in a secluded valley, a fortress of logs and stone veiled by towering oaks. He told her it was for their safety, close enough to the wilderness trail to guide families, but private enough to shield them from raids. To Mercy, it felt like a secret kingdom, her husband, her child growing inside her, and a new life that felt like destiny finally smiling upon her. In the evenings, Daniel read aloud from books he claimed to have carried from Philadelphia. Shakespeare's sonnets, fragments of scripture, even philosophy that soared above Mercy's young understanding. She leaned into his words, her head on his shoulder, believing she had stepped into a world larger than the one she had lost. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she felt chosen. Loved, protected, but Daniel's tenderness was not love. It was conditioning. He praised her when she documented weather patterns in her diary, told her she was invaluable. When she recorded safe passes through the mountains, admired her handwriting as she copied family names and destinations. Every stroke of her pen was information he needed, and every compliment was a chain tightening around her neck. Her pregnancy, too, was wrapped in calculated care. Daniel made her teas for her nausea, rubbed her swollen feet, spoke to her belly as though the child was already listening. Yet there was a silence that shadowed his kindness, long absences where he vanished into the forest, returning with supplies he never explained. Flour, sugar, coffee, sometimes trinkets too fine for the wilderness. Traded with a merchant, he would say. A gift from a Cherokee chief, he would insist. His lies were smooth, but their weight began pressing on Mercy's mind. At first, she told herself it was frontier life. Men carried burdens women could not understand. But one night, alone in bed, the baby turning inside her, she whispered a thought that froze her blood. What if Daniel's strength is not protecting me, but hiding me from the truth? Her diary recorded it with trembling hand. He loves me, but in his eyes there is something I cannot name. I pray it is my imagination. I pray it is not what I fear. It was the first crack in the dream. And once a crack appears, the structure begins to crumble. It was early spring when Mercy's illusions finally began to rot. The snows had melted into swollen rivers, and families once again braved the wilderness trail. Daniel left for days at a time, guiding wagons through dangerous mountain passes. Mercy, heavy with child, would sit alone in the cabin, listening to the silence press against the walls. But silence is never permanent. One evening, long after sunset, she heard the sound of wheels groaning over roots, horses snorting, children crying. She rushed to the door, expecting Daniel to arrive with a family grateful for safe passage. But what she saw froze her. A wagon lurched into the clearing, its boards splintered, its canvas torn. Inside, no smiling family climbed down. Instead, Daniel led the oxen forward, his hands steady, his face expressionless. And then she saw it, blood staining the wagon's side, pooling beneath the wood, dripping into the dirt. Go inside, Mercy, he told her, his voice low, almost tender. But there was no warmth in his eyes. She hesitated, her hands gripping her swollen belly. He said it again, sharper this time. Inside, she obeyed, but through the thin wood walls of their cabin, she heard the sounds. The creak of boards being pried loose, heavy, dragging across the earth, the muffled thud of something being buried. Mercy pressed her hands over her ears, but it was no use. Her mind filled in the silence with the screams of children that never reached the air. The next morning, when she dared step outside, the clearing bore no trace of the wagon. The earth was freshly turned near the tree line, dark soil uneven where Daniel had worked through the night, and on the cabin table lay a silver locket, delicate and finely made. Mercy picked it up with shaking hands, opened it, and saw the painted miniature of a woman she had never met. She dropped it as though it had burned her. When Daniel returned from washing his hands in the creek, he smiled. "We'll never want for anything, Mercy. Not you, not the child." She tried to smile back, but her diary tells the truth of that night. "He buries more than strangers. He buries the girl I was, and I fear he is burying me alive. Before we go further, I want you to pause. If you're still with me, if you feel the chill of this truth crawling down your spine, type in the comments, 'I see the unseen.' Not once, but twice. Let the world know you refuse to look away, because from this moment forward, the story ceases to be a secret romance and becomes something far more terrifying, the systematic unraveling of a child bride into the unwilling witness of a monster's empire." The diary changed after that night. Mercy's words grew sharper, her entries shorter, each line written like a blade testing the strength of its edge. She no longer recorded the weather or the names of families they met. She recorded Daniel, his absences, the weight of his return, the objects he brought home, rings too small for his hands, a child's toy, a bonnet stained faintly at the hem. Every item became a clue in a puzzle she could not yet admit she was solving. Daniel was methodical. He never struck inside their home. He never let her see blood upon his hands. But patterns emerged. Families who trusted him never appeared again at the next settlement. Wagons vanished into the woods, leaving no trace but the whispers of other travelers. "We hired a man named Crenshaw, and we never saw our kin again." Mercy began to mark these whispers in her diary, building an invisible ledger of the dead. At first, she told herself it was paranoia, pregnancy playing tricks on her mind, loneliness twisting her thoughts. But the evidence mounted undeniable, written in her own neat hand. She counted at least a dozen families gone within the span of a year. Dozens of men, women, children swallowed whole by the wilderness. And at the center always was Daniel. Yet what terrified her most was not the murders. It was how careful he was with her. He never raised his voice. He never struck her. Instead, he lavished her with kindness, as though sculpting her loyalty, binding her closer with every crime he concealed. She was no longer just his wife. She was the guardian of his secret, the witness he could not allow to leave. One night, as the fire crackled low, Daniel reached for her diary. Her heart stopped. "You've been writing so much," he said softly, running his fingers over the cover. "Perhaps one day our child will read these pages and know how strong his mother was." He kissed her forehead, placed the book back in her lap, and smiled. But in his eyes, Mercy saw something colder. Not admiration, not love. Possession. She wrote that night with trembling hands, "If I stop writing, I am dead. If he ever reads what I truly write, I am worse than dead. My words are my only breath, but I fear they are also my gallows." Her diary was no longer a comfort. It was evidence. And evidence in Daniel Crenshaw's world was a death sentence. The birth came on a night split open by thunder. The cabin shook as if the sky itself wanted to tear it apart, but inside, Mercy screamed against the storm. Daniel held her hand, whispering encouragement, his grip both steady and suffocating. For hours she labored, drifting in and out of consciousness, until at last the child arrived. A boy, his cry sharp as a knife cutting through the darkness. Mercy wept as she held him. He was small, fragile, his skin flushed and slick, his tiny fists curling as though ready to fight the world he had been dragged into. Daniel's face softened when he saw the child, but the softness did not linger. He lifted the boy from her arms with reverence, as though presenting an heir. "He will be strong," Daniel said. "Stronger than me. He will know the wilderness. He will carry my name." A Mercy wanted to object, to tell him this boy was not a vessel for his legacy, but a soul of his own. But she had no strength left. Instead, she watched as Daniel cradled the infant with a kind of pride she had never seen before. A pride that frightened her more than his cruelty. In the weeks that followed, her recovery was slow, but Daniel's vigilance grew. He brought her food, fetched water, even rocked the child to sleep. To anyone else, he might have seemed the perfect husband. Yet Mercy saw through it. His care was not born of love, but of control. With a child in her arms, she could not run. With sleepless nights and a body still broken from childbirth, she could not fight. The baby had bound her to him in ways no vow ever could. Still, within that helplessness, a flicker of defiance stirred. Mercy began writing not only for herself, but for her son. She hid entries within the folds of blankets, beneath floorboards, inside the seams of clothing, She wrote warnings, confessions, desperate truths. Your father is not what he seems. If you ever read this, know that blood waters the roots of this home. Each secret page became a seed of rebellion, planted against the day her son might uncover it, or the day someone else might stumble upon her words. But Daniel sensed shifts in her silence. One night, as he held the baby by the firelight, he looked at her with eyes that stripped her bare. "You're thinking too much, Mercy," he said softly. "A wife should rest. Leave the thinking to me." Her blood ran cold. She forced a smile, but her diary tells us the truth. "He watches my mind as closely as he watches my body, and I fear one day he will try to own them both completely." The storm that began with her child's first cry had not ended. It had only just begun. Summer brought travelers again. Wagons creaked along the wilderness trail, laughter spilling from them like music. Mercy would stand at the window, the child in her arms, listening to voices she longed to join. Freedom always passed so close, yet just out of reach. One evening, two men appeared at the edge of the clearing. They were young, sunburned, carrying rifles slung across their shoulders. Hunters, by their look. Their boots sank into the damp soil as they approached, calling out for water and a place to rest. Mercy's heart leapt into her throat. Strangers. Witnesses. A chance. Daniel greeted them with his practiced warmth, shaking their hands, leading them toward the cabin. He offered food, fire, and a place to sleep. To anyone else, it would have seemed hospitality, but Mercy knew the ritual. It always began this way. Inside, she sat quietly, nursing the baby as the hunters laughed, thanked Daniel, and shared stories of the road. They spoke of a missing family, a wagon that had vanished near the ridge. One of the men frowned as he mentioned the rumor of a guide who led travelers astray. Mercy's grip on her child tightened. She dared not speak, but when Daniel stepped outside to fetch more wood, one of the hunters turned to her. "Miss, you all right out here? Place looks lonely." For a moment, Mercy thought she might collapse into sobs, tell them everything, beg them to take her away. But then she remembered the locket, the wagon, the blood. She remembered the freshly turned earth near the tree line. She saw Daniel's shadow stretching across the clearing through the firelight. If she spoke, these men would die tonight. She knew it with the certainty of a noose tightening, so she smiled instead. "I am well," she whispered. "My husband takes good care of us." The hunter studied her face, suspicion flickering in his eyes. But Daniel returned before he could press further, carrying an armful of wood and a smile that did not reach his eyes. Later that night, Mercy did not sleep. She listened as the hunters' voices faded into snores, and then she heard Daniel rise, heard the door creak, heard his boots on the soil. The silence after was unbearable. She clutched her baby, rocking him back and forth, praying she was wrong. But when dawn broke, the clearing was empty. The men were gone. Their rifles were gone. Their laughter would never sound again, and Mercy's diary gained 2 more lines etched in fear. "They came as a chance to save me. I sent them to their graves. My silence is murder, too." After the hunters vanished, Mercy's dreams turned violent. She wrote of waking in the night, soaked in sweat, the baby clutched so tightly to her chest. She feared she might crush him. In her sleep, she had seen Daniel's hands around her throat, had seen him whispering in their son's ear, shaping the boy into a mirror of himself. She began to hide things. Small things, desperate things. A knife slipped beneath the mattress. A pouch of dried meat folded into her apron. Scraps of cloth she stitched into makeshift slings, the kind one might need for travel. Her diary records every step like a blueprint, a secret plan growing in the shadows of her fear. But Daniel was not blind. His watchfulness deepened, his presence wrapped around her like barbed wire. He insisted on holding the child more often, rocking him to sleep, teaching him to grasp his finger. Mercy noted how Daniel would whisper to the infant, words she could never fully hear. Once she crept close enough to catch a fragment. "You'll be mine, stronger than her, stronger than anyone." It was no longer just about keeping her captive. Daniel was shaping their son, molding him into an heir of his cruelty. One evening, Daniel returned from the forest later than usual. His shirt was damp, his boots caked with mud. He carried no game, no supplies, only a rag doll with one glass eye missing. He placed it on the hearth as though it were a prize. "For the boy," he said softly. Mercy's stomach turned. She recognized the doll. She had seen it in the hands of a child that passed through weeks earlier. A child who never reached the next town. That night, Mercy resolved to run. She could not let her son grow up in Daniel's shadow. But in her diary, she confessed the truth that made her heart collapse. I fear I do not know where the wilderness ends and where Daniel begins. He has swallowed the land itself. If I flee, will the forest give me back, or will it carry me back to him? Still, the decision had been made. She would risk death. She would risk starvation. Anything was better than watching her son's eyes turn into his father's. But Daniel seemed to sense her resolve before she ever acted. For the next 3 nights, he did not sleep deeply. He sat by the fire, the rifle across his knees, the child in his arms, and when Mercy asked why, he only smiled and said, "You dream too loudly, Mercy. I have to keep watch for both of us." The chance came on a night when the moon was swallowed by storm clouds. Rain lashed the clearing, the wind howled through the cabin walls, and Daniel, for the first time in weeks, slept deeply, his rifle propped by the door, his chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. Mercy's hands shook as she swaddled the baby close against her body. She took the pouch of food, the knife, the scraps of cloth she had hidden for months. She did not allow herself to hesitate. She opened the door and stepped into the storm, her bare feet sinking into mud, her heart pounding louder than the thunder. The forest welcomed her with darkness. Branches whipped her face, roots clawed at her ankles, but she pressed on. The baby stirred, whimpered, and she whispered promises into his ear. Almost free, just a little farther, hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time bent beneath fear. Then she saw it, the faint glow of lanterns in the distance, voices rising faintly over the storm. Travelers. Salvation. She stumbled toward them, clutching her son so tightly she thought he might vanish if she loosened her grip. But then, crack, a branch snapped behind her. Mercy froze. The voices fell silent. The lanterns flickered, turned away, swallowed back into the trees as though they'd never been there. And then came Daniel's voice. Calm. Loud. Drenched in something worse than rage. Mercy. He stepped from the shadows, the rain dripping off his hat, the rifle in his hands. His face was unreadable, but his eyes glowed with a light she had never seen before. You think the forest will save you? The forest is mine. Every trail, every shadow, every whisper. You cannot leave me, because out here there is only me. Mercy fell to her knees, the baby crying in her arms. She thought he might strike her, might take the child and end it there. Instead, Daniel lowered the rifle. He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. Run again, he whispered, and I'll bury him where you'll never find him. The words hollowed her out. She staggered back to the cabin, her legs carrying her without thought. Inside, she collapsed onto the floorboards, the storm still raging outside, her son still pressed to her chest, and in her diary that night, her words were barely legible, smeared with tears and rainwater. I have seen death in his hands before. Tonight, I saw eternity. I am already buried here, though my body still walks. The days after her failed escape blurred into a fever dream. Mercy described waking to the sound of her own voice, whispering things she could not remember saying. Sometimes she would stand at the edge of the clearing with the baby in her arms, staring into the forest as though it were staring back. Daniel's words clung to her like rot, the forest is mine. And soon, she began to believe it. Paths she thought she knew twisted into new shapes. Streams that once ran clear now seemed to bleed rust into the soil. Every time she stepped beyond the clearing, she swore she heard footsteps behind her, though when she turned there was nothing but shadows. Worse still, the child began to change. His laughter had once been soft, bubbling. Now it came rarely, and when it did, it was sharp, echoing strangely in the cabin. Mercy wrote of nights when she awoke to find Daniel holding the boy at the window, whispering to him in a tongue she could not understand. The baby's tiny hands would reach for Daniel's face, his gaze fixed, unblinking, as if mesmerized. Mercy began to see things in the corners of her vision, shapes between the trees, faces pressed against the glass, pale and fleeting. She thought of the hunters, of the missing families, of the doll with one glass eye. The forest seemed alive with their ghosts, and yet Daniel walked among them unafraid, as if he were their master. One entry in her diary broke from her usual trembling script, scrawled in jagged, furious lines. "This place is not wilderness. It is a church. He is its priest, and we are its sacrifices." But even as she wrote it, she feared the truth was worse, that the land itself bent to Daniel's will, and that she and her child were only pieces in a ritual too vast for her to understand. That night, a storm clawed through the sky again. Mercy lay awake, the baby pressed to her chest, listening to the wind, and through the roar of the thunder, she heard them, voices, dozens of them, weeping, chanting, calling her name. She tried to wake Daniel, but he was already standing by the door, his rifle in his hands, smiling as if he'd been waiting all along.
"You hear them now,"
he said softly. "Good. That means you're finally listening." Mercy could no longer tell the difference between waking and dreaming. Each night brought visions that clung to her long after dawn, a circle of figures in the forest, their faces hollow, their eyes black pits reflecting firelight. She saw Daniel among them, younger, untouched by time, lifting a blade as voices chanted in unison. When she tried to shake the images away, they only grew sharper, more insistent. Her diary entries changed. Where once she wrote in whispers of fear and escape, now her words spilled like warnings, fragments of a truth she didn't want to believe. He does not age the way others do. His footsteps fall where no tracks remain. The men who vanish are not buried. They are consumed, and the forest feeds him still. One morning, she noticed Daniel's reflection in the window as he stood behind her. But it was wrong. The reflection moved half a beat slower, its mouth forming words that his lips never spoke aloud. She nearly screamed, but when she turned, he only smiled, as though he'd been waiting for her to see it. That night the baby awoke screaming, his tiny body rigid, his eyes wide but unseeing. Mercy cradled him, rocking, whispering prayers she had long forgotten. Daniel came to her side, placed a hand on the child's chest, and suddenly, silence. The boy's sobs ceased, his breathing calmed. Too calm. Mercy looked down and swore for a moment that her son's eyes weren't his own, but Daniel's staring back at her. In her diary, she confessed, "I am losing him. Not to death, but to something worse. He is being rewritten, line by line, until he is no longer mine." The forest, too, betrayed her. The trees that once seemed like guardians now leaned inward, their branches nodding above the cabin, as if to keep her in. She wrote of whispers, threading through the leaves, carrying Daniel's voice, even when he was silent. The breaking point came when she ventured to the stream for water. The surface rippled though no wind touched it, and there, staring back at her, was not her own reflection, but the pale faces of the hunters, mouths open in soundless screams. She stumbled backward, the bucket slipping from her hands, and when she looked again, only her reflection remained. When she returned to the cabin, Daniel was waiting at the door. His eyes glittered with triumph. "You see it now," he murmured. "The truth. You're not my prisoner, Mercy. You're my witness." Mercy's final days were a nightmare, stitched from shadows and whispers. The forest pressed in around the cabin like a living thing, the trees groaning under unseen weight, and the wind carried voices older than memory. She had long stopped distinguishing reality from hallucination. Every shadow could be Daniel, every rustle a threat, every whisper the echo of the families he had claimed. Her diary had become a map of terror, each page a record of the crimes, rituals, and manipulations she had witnessed. But one entry chilled her most of all. He does not merely kill. He transforms. Each life he takes fuels him, bends the land to his will, and strengthens the network of fear. This is how empires rise. This is how secrets endure. It was on the night of the winter solstice that Mercy understood the final truth. Daniel brought her to the clearing beyond the cabin, the baby swaddled against his chest. Lanterns flickered along the tree line, casting long, jagged shadows. Faces appeared in the dark, some human, some not. And in the center, a figure older than Daniel himself, cloaked in shadows, whose eyes glimmered with fire. "This is the pattern," Daniel whispered. "Every soul has a role. You were chosen to see, to record, to witness. But witnessing alone is not enough. You must endure, or the knowledge dies with you." Mercy held the baby tight. She could feel the weight of the generations, the blood of those erased, the cries of those lost. And then Daniel turned to her, his smile now a mask of triumph, and she realized the ultimate horror. He intended to bind her and the child into his empire of control, to make them living records of his power. With trembling hands, she wrote her final words in the diary. If anyone finds this, know the truth. There is evil that wears civilization's face. There are men who bend reality, who hide in plain sight, and they cannot be stopped, not by law, not by prayer, only by awareness, by memory, by refusing to forget. The last thing she saw was Daniel's shadow looming over her, and the child's eyes reflecting his own. Then darkness. History would remember Mercy Harrow as a child bride who vanished into the wilderness, her name whispered with sorrow. But the diary, later found decades afterward in the ruins of St. Mercy Hospital, revealed far more: a pattern of corruption, systematic violence, and manipulation that stretched far beyond her small life. The hospital itself was built upon the legacy of hidden atrocities, each brick soaked in fear, each hallway a testament to what men will do when power is left unchecked. And so, the secret endures. The whispers in the trees, the shadows in the hallways, the knowledge buried beneath polite society, they are all echoes of what Mercy saw. The forest claimed her, but the truth survived. And now, as you hear her story, you carry it. Remember, knowledge is power, and power is always dangerous.